Presentation is called Creating a Cloud-like Infrastructure with FreeBSD. My name is Shawn Webb, and I work for Wayfair. I'm a security analyst and software engineer for them. Oh, wrong window. There we go. So a little bit of an intro. Sorry, I should keep on there. I'm an independent security researcher. I've been doing independent security research for the past 5 or 6 years now. It's been a hobby of mine. I'm a tech blogger. I write mainly blog entries about FreeBSD and OpenIndiana and a tool I created called libhijack. And I'm actually speaking about libhijack tomorrow. It's a pretty fun tool to use. Lots of interesting research there. But after I just barely uploaded these slides up to my tech blog, so if you want the slides, you can just download it from there. I've got my business cards here, so that I have on the back of the card I've written my personal info, so the URL for my tech blog, and my email address. So if you have any questions, feel free to email me, contact me. Like I said, I'm a security engineer and software engineer and security analyst for Wayfair, and Wayfair is a large online retailer. If you've purchased anything for your home through Amazon, chances are you've purchased from us. We used to be called CSN Stores. I find this pretty ironic and funny, but I have to put this because of our lawyers. Any beliefs, opinions, etc. are mine and do not necessarily reflect those of my employer, even though my employer's name is like right here, so and on every single slide. As a software engineer and security analyst, some of my tasks are to figure out big pieces of our system, our puzzle. And we've got a pretty large infrastructure at Wayfair. We use hundreds of FreeBSD VMs inside of a Zen cloud, hosted by Citrix Zen servers. And we use Citrix Zen Center to manage those servers, and it's pretty much a very crappy task to do. We run many different VMs. We run mostly FreeBSD and a lot of Windows and a few Linux. And right now, our code base, our website we're transitioning from classic ASP to PHP. So we're getting away from Windows and onto FreeBSD. So FreeBSD has this really cool feature called jails, and we don't utilize them at Wayfair at all. We utilize full-on VMs in Citrix Zen Server, and I hate Zen Server. I really hate Zen Server because its console is based on VNC, and so whenever you go to the VM's console and you type a character, the console doesn't repaint correctly. And so you have to actually close out of the the Zen Center management software, reopen it, and wait 5 minutes for the infrastructure to resync itself, and then type another character in the console, close Zen Center, reopen it, wait 5 minutes, and it takes about 5 hours to set up a VM. We use VM templates. We set up a VM, we template it, and then we clone that template, but there's still last minute things to do after creating that template, like setting up the networking, and then once networking's set up, then it runs all its scripts and stuff, but it takes about 5 hours to get to that point. And using FreeBSD jails, I figured out a solution to turn that 5 hours down to about a quarter of a second. So the solution that we're going to talk about today is going to combine many different features, about 3 different distinct features of FreeBSD, to create a cloud-like infrastructure. And Wayfair will we're eventually going to switch We're going to still use Zen Center because we still need to run other VMs of other OSs, so Linux and Windows. But we'll restructure that so all our FreeBSD machines get compacted into one FreeBSD machine. We use hundreds of jails, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in depth later. So what we're going to talk about today, we're going to start off with a few definitions, and then we're going to talk about what is virtualization, because there's different types of virtualization. And we're going to concern ourselves with two different types of virtualization. We're going to talk a little bit about quick history, a little bit of history between jails, virtual networking, and ZFS inside of FreeBSD. We're going to talk a little bit about why jails, why should we choose jails rather than full-on VMs, you know, like what ESXi provides or Zen Center. Then we're going to talk a little bit about setting up virtual networking, how to get our virtual networking stack set up in FreeBSD. And we're going to talk a little bit about basic jailing, how to get a template jail set up and clone that template jail so we can spin up new jails instantly. Then we'll talk about combining those three, and the combination of those three is what creates our cloud-like infrastructure. And we're going to talk about future work. There's a lot of work to do in the future. There's still a bunch of things that need to happen for this to be fully production ready. As it stands right now, I consider this dev environment ready. So if you want to roll this out to your dev environments, that's great. But if you want to roll it out in production, there's still some work to be done. So some definitions. FreeBSD is an awesome POSIX compliant 4.4 BSD Lite based operating system. Now I say it's 4.4 BSD Lite based, but it's basically evolved pretty much since then. You know, it's like us evolving from apes. We're much more refined and a lot less hairy. Well, some of us are. Virtual network is a completely virtualized TCP/IP stack for use within the OS itself. So usually, you know, you have your physical NIC that has a physical Cat5 or Cat6 or fiber cable connected to a switch or a router or, you know, that kind of thing. A virtual network is a virtual NIC. You know, it has its own virtual network cable plugged into a virtual switch. It has its own virtual routing tables, and so it's basically the paradigm of a physical network just virtualized within the operating system. ZFS is the god of file systems. It was developed by Sun, and Oracle purchased Sun, I think last year, maybe the year before. Oracle closed the source after zpool v28. Going to stop here and go on a tangent. A lot of people think that because Oracle closed the source, that ZFS is dead. ZFS is far from dead. There are many contributions coming from the open source community. Delphix, for one, is a company. They specialize in data integrity and data storage solutions, and they've been working on some awesome ZFS enhancements that apply to open source ZFS implementations that currently run zpool v28. So ZFS is far from dead. No matter what anyone else says, if someone says ZFS is dead, that is 100% incorrect. Jail is OS-based. A FreeBSD jail is OS-based virtualization. So we'll talk about what OS-based virtualization is in a little bit. Drupal is a popular open source content management solution. And so I created, for my solution, I created a Drupal module that, that basically acts like Citrix Zen Center. It's not as feature complete. I've only been working on it for the past couple months, and it's very, very usable, but there's still a lot of work to be done on it. So we're going to talk a little bit about what is virtualization. Virtualization is the process by which one or more virtual machines run on a single physical server. So when you run, typically Before virtualization, you have one server, and that runs one operating system. You can only run one operating system at a time. So you can only run Linux or Windows or FreeBSD or Solaris, just that operating system at one time. Virtualization, as you guys all probably know, allows you to run multiple operating systems simultaneously. So you can run FreeBSD, you can run Linux, you can run Windows, Solaris, all at the same time. Hardware virtualization virtualizes everything, all the way down from the keyboard to Apache. Everything from your CPU to the software stack. Everything is emulated, everything is virtualized. And within these past few years, it's been really, the virtualization stack has been really enhanced so that you're not emulating nearly as much, but the concept is the same, that every single piece of hardware is emulated in essence. Some examples of that would be Zen or VirtualBox or VMware. OS level virtualization virtualizes only the operating system. So your VMs, your virtual machines, share the same kernel and they share the same hardware. They know that they're virtualized, and they work together to share resources. So yeah, that is OS level virtualization, and FreeBSD jails is OS level virtualization. So when you use OS level virtualization, you cannot run VMs of a different operating system. So if you're using OS level virtualization with FreeBSD, your VMs are FreeBSD. Same thing with Linux, and they're the same kernel, the same everything. Except you can have different user lands. That's a bit more of that's more advanced than this presentation will cover. You can run, technically you can run a 32-bit jail inside of a 64-bit host, and you can do some other cool things. You can run a Linux jail in a FreeBSD environment. It's pretty cool. So jails was first introduced into FreeBSD 4 by a very talented developer named Paul Henningkamp. And he continues working on the FreeBSD project even today, and he has given some many great solutions to today's technical problems. Jails are continuously being improved, even though they are very, very solid and very they can be used very well right now. There's still a lot of improvements that have been made and still need to be made. You can kind of think of it as a secure replacement for chroot, but it's much more than that. We'll see that it's much more than that in my demos at the end of the presentation. It is OS-based virtualization. It inspired Solaris Zones containers. This presentation in its whole, the concepts can be applied directly over to Solaris. These features inspired many Solaris features. And so Solaris actually, because it's paid development rather than hobbyist, they were actually able to get a more mature implementation of jails. They call it zones. And so that's actually what I use at home is Open Indiana, which is a flavor of Open Solaris. So, history of virtual networking. There's an ongoing project in the FreeBSD kernel called vimage, and that is overall to virtualize FreeBSD's kernel. Not only to virtualize the networking stack, but to virtualize other things like System 5 IPC calls and process address spaces and or namespaces. And what we're going to talk about today is VNet, the virtual networking stack part of vimage. That's really the only part that we care about today. Work started in FreeBSD 7 and didn't become an official feature until 9.0 release. You'll see a lot of blogs about people using it in version 8, but it was pretty unstable back then. And it's a lot more stable these days. It's analogous to Solaris Crossbow, and it's not as feature complete as Crossbow. I love Crossbow. Crossbow, you can, and VNet as well, but Crossbow especially makes it really easy to emulate different networks. So you can emulate a 10 gig Ethernet network, and you can emulate packet loss and bandwidth limitations, and all that kind of stuff is integrated directly into Crossbow. I love it.
Sorry, is this similar to the virtual distributed Ethernet project?
Is that Linux?
I don't know that VDE is tied to any one thing. It's
Oh.
kind of like VMware's, you set up a switch.
I gotcha. Yeah.
Can I think
from
that? Or?
From what it sounds like, probably. I don't have any experience with that, well, but it sounds like probably.
Does vImage or Crossbow, is it a kernel space thing? Or
it is.
Okay.
It is.
It runs in user space.
Yes, it does.
So they are different in that respect.
Okay. Well, it's exposed to the user space. So it is kernel space drivers, but it's exposed to user space. We'll see how to work with virtual networking. This is just the history of it, basically. So there are some reasons to use the virtual networking. With traditional jails, you don't have to use virtual networking. You can use a physical IP direct on the network, and you can actually do you can emulate a virtual networking stack in FreeBSD without VNet, but it's kind of tedious and it sucks. But when you use vImage, you get network security, much more enhanced network security. You can actually we'll see how to create a virtual layer 3 switch, and you can add like span devices on that layer 3 switch, and you can do a lot of things. You can do spanning tree protocol. You can prevent promiscuous mode. You can do a lot of cool things with vImage security-wise. You could also NAT your jails. You don't have to do this, but for purposes of this presentation, because I'm using a wireless connection, you can only bind one IP address to a wireless connection, so I can't bridge these jails in my demo. We're going to NAT the jails, and I'll show you how to do the NATing. It's really simple. Again, you don't have to do it. You can bridge directly onto the physical network, but it's nice to do. And especially it's nice to do because if you're setting up a template jail and inside of a production network, you don't necessarily want template jails to have a dedicated IP. Because you're just going to spin up that template jail, set up some configuration files, download some packages, and then it's going to remain turned off for months and months at a time until you go to update the template. And so NATing can be really useful in that respect. A little bit of history in ZFS. It is truly the god of file systems. If you are not convinced of that by me just saying it, there's a great 3-hour presentation by, I think it's Brian Cantrell of Sun, and he dives into how ZFS works, and it is truly amazing.
I was just going to say, yeah, I mean, I absolutely love ZFS. We're running it right now down at the Hackerspace in Provo for our main storage solution down there. It's an absolute wonderful system to just work with.
What OS?
We're using ZFS Guru right now, so it's FreeBSD 9 based.
Okay.
Yeah, 9 based with Z28. So.
Nice. Way cool. So ZFS has many different features too. You can do instant snapshotting clones, and these snapshots are inexpensive CPU wise, inexpensive RAM, inexpensive for disk space consumption. They're awesome, and you can clone these snapshots. Once you take a snapshot, you can clone the snapshot instantly. It takes about, actually it's not instantly, it's about maybe 10 milliseconds, a quarter of a second. So, but it is so amazing. You can use transparent encryption, transparent compression. There's a lot of features, NFSv4 ACLs. I could go on forever. ZFS was first integrated on April 6th, 2007 into FreeBSD. zpool v28 was merged into 8 stable and 9 release. So FreeBSD just barely released like a week or two ago version 8.3, which is the last version in its 8 series. And that includes zpool v28. and 9.0 release contains epool v28. Many wonderful features, and many new and powerful features are coming from Delphix and Joyent. So when you combine all of these three, you get a basic cloud-like infrastructure. You use ZFS for instance snapshots and clones, VNet for virtual networks, dedicated networking stack for each jails, including route tables, jails for VMs. Why jails though? Why not, you know, we already have existing infrastructure for cloud, you know, cloud hosting. Citrix Zen Center, VMware ESXi, and those are free. At least ESXi is. I don't know about Citrix's solution, but why jails? Well, jails it's much more CPU efficient than VMs, and it uses very little disk space consumption. Like my jails at work, my development jails, take up about I don't know, 50 megs, whereas our development VMs for the rest of the developers inside of Citrix, we allocate minimum 4 gigs of disk space and 2 gigs of memory. Jails are take up as little CPU, memory, and disk space consumption as they need to, and they can expand. You can cap them, you can do disk quotas for each jails. You can do CPU limiting, and you can do memory limiting for each jails. But by default, with a basic cloud-like infrastructure, they scale very, very, very well. There are some gotchas though. PF is a very popular firewall for FreeBSD and OpenBSD. And I think NetBSD has it too, but I could be wrong on that. And when you use VNet, you cannot use PF currently. There is a major desire within the community to have PF support with VNet. So I'm sure there's a developer doing that, implementing that right now. And I'm sure that'll happen eventually. But there is still a firewall you can use called IPFW, which is FreeBSD's native firewall. It was created specifically for FreeBSD, and I don't think any other operating system includes IPFW. I think it's maybe OS 10. I think OS 10 uses PF though. So now we're going to dive into how to get this stuff set up. So you need a special kernel configuration. In your kernel configuration, you need to enable vimage and IPFW. And you need to set up your firewall. I don't think a firewall is 100% necessary. You just have to set, technically, I think the only thing that you have to set is enabling the gateway enable. It's a sysctl that makes FreeBSD act as a router. And you can set up NAT. Again, it's not required, but it's very useful, especially for this presentation. We'll use NAT. So at the top here, if you guys can't see this, my slides are online on my tech blog, so feel free to download them, and you'll have all this, all these commands. So inside the top is the kernel config. So you enable options vimage, IP firewall, and IP divert. And then you recompile the kernel and install the new kernel, and there you go. You've got virtual networking enabled in your kernel. And then in your initialization script configuration file, your rc.conf file, you set gateway enabled to yes and firewall enabled to yes. This enables IPFW, not PF. And you set the firewall type to open. You can change that if you want, but I'm just doing some simple defaults for this presentation. And enable the NAT daemon and set the interface, and you can change that if you want to whatever your WAN interface is. Set up virtual networking. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a bridge. And you can think of a bridge as a layer 3 switch in FreeBSD, a bridge device. And then we'll create what are called e-pair devices in FreeBSD. E-pair devices, that is our VNet device. When you did the options vimage, that gives you the e-pair device. And when you create a single e-pair devices, you actually create a pair of two if configurable devices. And so you create, the naming scheme is the name e-pair, and then the number, and then A and B. And so if we create e-pair 0, then we'll create e-pair 0, e-pair 0A and e-pair 0B, and we can if config both of those devices. You can think of those two devices as two ends of an Ethernet cable. You plug one end into the bridge, which is our layer 3 switch, and you plug the other end into the jail. So you can swap them. It doesn't matter which way you do, but I usually do the A device inside the bridge and the B device in the jail, and you can switch that if you want. I don't recommend it just because it doesn't seem natural that way. So here's how you create the bridge. If config bridge 0 create, and you can do any number if you want. You can do 60 or 2 or whatever number you want. But for this presentation, we're just going to stick with 0 devices, the 0 device. And then you create the e-pair device. And then this next command, we're going to give the bridge an IP. And that way, the jails are going to set down here. The jails are going to set their default route to the IP of the bridge. And that is for networking. You don't have to give bridges IPs if you're doing bridging onto physical networks or onto other virtual networks. But for purposes of this presentation, we're doing NAT, which means we're going to give the bridge an IP. And then we add the device, the e-pair 0A device, to the bridge. And then we bring the e-pair 0A device up. And so the next commands down here assume that the jail is already booted up. And in the next few slides, I'll show you how to boot up a jail. And so you boot up the jail, and then you plug in the B device, e-pair 0B, into the jail. So the jail has to be booted up before you plug the e-pair device into it. So this first command here, if config e-pair 0B, vnet, and then the name of the jail. So each jail has a name. So in this presentation, we'll create a template jail, and we'll name the jail template. And so when we assign the e-pair device to the template jail, it'll be if config e-pair 0B vnet template. And then this executes a command inside of a jail. The jexec command executes commands inside of a jail. So inside the jail, we're going to run if config e-pair 0B inet 192.168.2.2. So that's giving it an IP address. And then we'll set the route. And then networking is enabled and fully online, and that jail is fully online. So to start up basic jail, what we're going to do is we're going to use ZFS to create a template jail data set. And then once our jail is fully configured and we have our config scripts how we want it, we have everything set up how we want it, we'll shut down the jail and create a snapshot of it. And then we can do attack of the clones. We can clone that snapshot over and over and over again to create new jails. So we'll install world in distribution. So to create our template jail, we'll install world in distribution. World is your userland binaries, so like the ls binary and su, that kind of stuff. And the distribution is like your etc file, so your password file and that kind of stuff, your etc scale directory, that kind of stuff. And then we'll install the ports tree. You don't have to install the ports tree, but I'm going to show you how, just so that you know how. And then you install the individual ports. And these are the commands that you run to do it. So this first command here, we're just setting a variable to hold the path of where our template jail is going to reside on the file system, just to make it easier on the eyes. And then this command here creates the parent data set for our template jail, or for all of our jails. And this right here, ZFS create tank jails template, that actually creates the data set for our template jail. And then we're going to change directory to the source tree, and then we'll install world. Of course, you need to build world first if you haven't already. This presentation assumes you already did, just for time purposes. And then you make distribution with the destination directory of the path of where your jail resides on the file system. And then this right here grabs the ports tree and extracts it inside of the jail. And then you set the DNS resolution, so you set your resolve.conf. We're just going to set it in this presentation to 8.8.8.8, Google's DNS server. And then you create, like you do the next commands are just basically copies of the VNet commands I showed you in previous slides. So you just create the bridge, give an IP, create the ePair device, add the ePair device to the bridge, bring the ePair device up. And then this is how you boot up a jail right here, these next few commands. So you mount, in your jails you have to mount the dev file system. And this is kind of confusing. So each jail can have their own dev file system, and you don't have to expose any dev devices to it. You can expose any the devices that you want, and it could be 0, it could be all of them, it could be some of them, but you should have devfs mounted in the template jail at least. When you're building ports, there's some ports that require certain dev devices in there, like the dev null device. And then nullfs is a way cool file system driver. What it does, it's basically like an enhanced symlink. So this is the user ports this is the ports tree inside the host, and then we're going to basically do an enhanced symlink to the template jail's user ports. So that makes it so that you don't have to spend hundreds of megs on each jail just to have their own ports tree. And so this right here is actually what boots up the jail. The command is jail-c, which stands for create, and it's going to be of type vnet. We're going to give it a host name of template, and then the jail's name is template, and then this is the path where it resides on the file system. And this persist flag here, that's just there because it looks pretty. So you have to have it, but I don't know why, but that's, yeah, you have to have it. So then you plug the ePair 0B, you plug the B ePair device into the template, into the jail. So if config ePair 0B vnet template. And then inside of the template jail, you if config ePair 0B inet 192.168.2.2, then you add the default route. In this case, 192.168.21. Or sorry, that's a little bit of a typo. My work, I use the 21 subnet at work, and did a 2 subnet for the presentation. Anyways, so we're gonna start a shell inside the jail, and now we're gonna change directory to the ports tree, and we're gonna change to the security, the sudo port, and we're gonna install it, and then clean all the object files, and then remove the dist files. And then we'll exit the jail. We'll snapshot the jail after it's all set up, after we've installed all our ports and configured them, all that kind of stuff. We'll snapshot it. So you run ZFS snapshot, then the name of the data set, which in this case is tank/jails/template, and then the @ symbol, and then the name of the snapshot. In this case, I usually do date timestamps. So I'll show you how to do that. It's pretty cool. And then you can, for new jails, you just clone it. Clone that snapshot. So you ZFS clone the name of the data set and the name of the snapshot, and then the name of the data set for the new jail. So FreeBSD has this way cool IPFW module called DummyNet. And you can combine VNet with DummyNet. And we do this at Wayfair. We actively do this at Wayfair because running a web all we do is we have our web presence, just our website, and we need to be able to test bandwidth limitations and different queue schemes and simulate packet loss and packet delays. Like we do have people that still use dial-up. I don't know why, but they still do. They probably have an outhouse, but they still have dial-up. Or simulated packet loss and packet delay. So if you're like if you're using your phone to go to our site, and packet loss and packet delays are pretty common with cellular networks. And so you can mix DummyNet with VNet, but DummyNet can be a little bit buggy when mixed with VNet. And I need to file a bug report. I need to file a couple bug reports. So what you want to do, because it can be a little bit buggy, you want to use one DummyNet config per pipe. Without VNet, if you just use DummyNet like normally, if you don't combine it with VNet, just use it by itself, you can do bandwidth limitation, queuing, simulated packet loss, and packet delays, all in the same DummyNet pipe, all in the same, all in one. But when you mix it with VNet, you can only do one of those per DummyNet pipe. So if you want to do bandwidth limitation and packet delays at the same time, then you have to have multiple DummyNet pipes. It's pretty easy to do, but it's just a little bit of a gotcha. So that's a lot of commands to remember. All of those commands, there's a lot to remember, and it takes a lot of time to get all of that memorized. There's some problems. Unfortunately, FreeBSD's initialization scripts, their rc.d system, does not support VNet jails. It does support jails in and of themselves, but not when mixed with VNet. And so if you're rebooting your server, you have to spin up these VNet jails all by hand. So you have to run ifconfig bridge or create the bridge, create the ePair device, spin up the jail, plug everything in, all that kind of stuff by hand. So every time your server reboots, and if you have hundreds of VMs like Wayfair does.
Just out of curiosity, does EasyJail help to alleviate any of these issues? Or?
I do not know. I used EasyJail once, and then I decided I hated it. So, because it does things, it's like cPanel. And if anyone here knows cPanel, they'd rather do things that I probably shouldn't say here because it's not safe for work. And so I'm not a fan of EasyJail. And so from what I can tell, EasyJail does not support VNet yet, but there is desire for that. And there is desire for FreeBSD's rc.d system, their initialization scripts, to support VNet jails. And so that is coming down the line. But it's a little bit complicated, and there's a few interesting politics that are going on, and so support isn't fully there just yet. It'll probably be supported within the next few months, but that will become.
Current branch, right?
What's that?
That would be in the current branch, right?
Yeah, and it'll probably be MFC'd back to 9 stable. So it'll probably be, depending on when the 9.1 release is tagged, it'll probably be in 9.1, but don't quote me on that. I'm not a FreeBSD developer. I am, but I'm not.
I follow all the lists.
Yeah. Okay. I'm not a committer. I am a developer, but I'm not a committer. I still have to actually submit patches upstream. So, don't quote me on anything official. And there are people reporting kernel panics destroying ePair devices. I've had 1 or 2 kernel panics, but the frequency is pretty low. I've created and destroyed ePair devices about 200, 250 times, and out of that amount, I've only had 1 or 2 kernel panics. And because of that, I don't recommend that VNet is used in production. It is 100%, it can be used in development. So if it's not a mission critical system, I mean, you can argue development is mission critical, but it's okay that it just randomly reboots. Takes 5 minutes of time to reboot. So But you can't do that with production. You have to have 100% uptime with production. So it's not 100% ready for production use just yet, VNet. No, I haven't at least. My setup is such that I can't do kernel dumps, and so I haven't been able to track that down. Nor I would probably have to do that on my spare time. I don't think my employer would pay for me to do that. ZenHVM plus vimage doesn't work. So you can, okay, so this is kind of hard to explain. You can run vimage inside of a Zen guest, and that's just fine. But you have to use the generic kernel for that. You can't use the Zen kernel, FreeBSD's ZenHVM. That's their para-virtualized kernel. I found this bug, and I need to actually do some digging and file a bug report. And it works. It works. Like, you can create the e-pair devices, you can create the bridge. It's when you try to destroy an e-pair device, it brings down networking 100% for all the jails and for the host. So like, you can't even ping the host. So, and it works up until you try to destroy an e-pair device. So as long as you never ever destroy an e-pair device, it does work. But otherwise, if you do destroy e-pair devices, it doesn't. So it does work if you're using FreeBSD Zen VM. If you're running a FreeBSD DOM0 or DOM-U VM, you can use the generic kernel, and that's what we do at Wayfair right now. So to make it easy, because like I said, that's a lot of commands to remember, and because there's no initialization script support just yet, you have to boot all these jails up by hand when your server reboots. And so what I've done is I've written a Drupal 7 module to administer these jails. It makes it really, really easy. And it's pretty much feature complete. It's very usable. I do recommend it never be used in production, at least in its current state. But it is completely 100% usable, and I still have some plans for it. E-pair devices, you can do ifconfig aliases, so you can have multiple IP addresses on one given e-pair device. And so my project doesn't support that yet. So if you want a jail to have multiple IPs, you have to assign it multiple e-pair devices. And so eventually I'll support ifconfig aliases, so you can do multiple IPs. And that would be very useful for when you're doing one IP is IPv4 and the other IP is IPv6. So you don't have to have one device for IPv4, one device for IPv6. You can actually combine them because they're aliases. Anyways, I'm not doing any sort of logging right now, so I need to do better logging. I need to report to Drupal 7's watchdog log whenever someone reboots a jail or takes a snapshot of it or deletes a snapshot or upgrades it, or that kind of thing. So I need to actually have better logging. I need better privilege separation. Right now, because my module is running inside of PHP, inside of a web server, so I have it running inside of Apache on my dev box. That Apache user, and I'm not using SU exec, so the whole Apache user needs passwordless sudo access to certain privileged commands. And that's not that secure. So I need to figure out, I probably need to take a look at SU exec and take a look at better privilege separation so we can get some actual security. And it's mainly this thing that that makes me really cautious about implementing it outside of dev. So because of this, that's a big security risk. Do not implement it in production. Eventually, I want to support an external API. So I want to be able to make it so that people can write their own programs and just call my module as a backend rather than having to use my module as the point-and-click interface. They can write their own point-and-click interface and use my module just as a backend. I did have one use case out of about 75 use cases where I didn't want VNet, and so I'm thinking about making VNet optional, but for me to be convinced of that, I need to have one more use case pop up. So I just spin that jail up by hand. Eventually, I want to support IPv6. All my database tables, the schema, the columns inside the database tables are all of the right size and length. And so that supports IPv6, but the commands I'm running are IPv4 centric. So what I need to do is it's pretty simple. What I need to do is just make it so I detect the length of the string, the length of the IP address, or whether it has colons in it or probably a regular expression, and support IPv6. So it's probably like a 5-10 minute fix. I just need to do it. And Citrix Zen Center, so you have multiple physical Citrix Zen servers, and you use one program, Zen Center, to manage all of those servers. And I want my Drupal 7 module to be set up the same way eventually, so that you can have one installation of this Drupal 7 module and administer all these jail hosts. So you can say and say this jail will be started on this host and this jail will be started here and that kind of stuff. And so I will not support non-ZFS setups. Because ZFS is the god of file systems, and to convince people that Linux sucks, I will not support non-ZFS setups. If you want to support UFS, if you want to support NTFS or ext4, if you want to do the same thing with the different file systems, or with a different file system, fork my code. It's on GitHub, and never ever send me a patch file for non-ZFS setup. I'm accepting patch files for any, or pull requests for any other feature, just not non-ZFS setups. So I am on GitHub, and that's where the module resides. Or it's in the ports tree, and I submitted a new port like 2 weeks ago, but the dude who is assigned to it is really busy. He just had his wife just had a daughter, and so he's a little bit busy with personal life. So I just released a new version of my GelAdmin Drupal module, but it's the new version is not in ports, but it is on GitHub, of course. I did do a git tag, and I actually did upload a tarball up onto GitHub. So I released version 0.3, and 0.3 is probably the first version of it where it's really, really usable outside of just my own use case. I will release a C version 2 because I've got a little GUI-less netbook. I've got my netbook here with me, and so I don't have a browser on it, so I can't use a browser to, I can't use a Drupal 7 because that requires a browser, and that requires a GUI. So I'm writing an ncurses version of my Drupal 7 module, and I'm going to have both of them will be completely be developed in parallel, and the features will be in sync with each other. So some real-world examples. Wayfair will be switching to using VNet jails for development environments. I'm currently using hundreds of FreeBSD VMs in a Zen Center environment. And we'll restructure. So every developer, we have about 50 developers right now, 30 to 50, and each developer has their own dedicated FreeBSD VM inside of Zen. And that's really, really not efficient. So we're going to restructure that to something more efficient, to a single FreeBSD. We're still going to use Zen Center because we still need to run other operating systems. But we're going to use a single FreeBSD Zen Center VM, and we'll run my Drupal 7 module. And then that VM will run hundreds of VNet jails. Rather than hundreds of full-on VMs in Zen, we're going to switch to hundreds of jails. So some future work. I need to submit a bug report for that. For this, I'll probably do it in my spare time. The Zen HVM kernel and vimage just don't mix well. I think it's because the Zen HVM kernel itself, because it's using the Zen para-virtualized networking device, that networking device is a virtual device. And so I think the different types of virtual networking devices are conflicting with each other and not playing well with each other. Obviously, we need better RC.D support, and that will come soon, hopefully. We just have to get over the politics and get an implementation going here. dtrace is awesome. I am in love with dtrace. I want dtrace support like Solaris zones have dtrace support, and you can do all sorts of metrics on these zones in Solaris. You can do metrics on their I/O and the CPU and that kind of thing. And take a look at Joint. Joint uses Open Indiana, which has full Solaris zone dtrace support, and they provide major metrics and heat maps, and it's really, really integrated nicely together. And you can do all sorts of way freaking cool things with dtrace. Complete virtualization. Some resources are still shared. 127.0.0.1, that IP actually is not shared. I just verified today, actually right before the talk, and I didn't update the slide. Each jail, you know, has its own IPs, and actually each jail, it used to be that the 127.0.0.1, even inside the jail, still pointed to everything. So it was the host and each jail in the host, and so each jail shared 127.0.0.1. That's no longer the case with VNet. But some resources are still shared, like System 5 IBC calls. And because of that, things like PostgreSQL server have some issues. You can only run one instance of Postgre server on a given host. No matter how many jails there are, you can only run one instance of Postgre. Actually, it's kind of a
one instance per port.
No,
You can't.
One instance total.
Does not have ports.
That's kind of a fib. It's one instance per user ID. So that's one of the other resources that are still shared, is user IDs are still shared too. And so user ID 50 is still, if you have user ID 50, like let's say 50 is the www user in one jail, and 50 is the MySQL user in another jail. Those, conceptually speaking, to FreeBSD in total, in and of itself, it views user ID 50 as the same thing. It's not virtualized yet. So, you know, there's still things, you know, like that. Complete virtualization still needs work. Puppet classes. We use Puppet heavily at Wayfair, and I've created a few Puppet classes, but I'm pretty much a noob when it comes to puppets. So there is desire for me to write Puppet classes, but it's pretty low on my priority list. Live migration would be awesome with jails, and there was a hosting company that implemented live migration, but they actually went under, and their work never got merged upstream, so we don't have live migration. And I would love to see that happen, so we can get a true cloud-like infrastructure. This is kind of a cloud-like infrastructure in its infancy. And I would love to see Linux's KVM ported to FreeBSD and run inside of a jail, but we need KVM first. And there was work to port Linux's KVM to FreeBSD, and they got it in pretty much an alpha state. But that project ran out of funding and never made it upstream. So that project was abandoned. So if someone wants to pick that up, that'd be awesome. So I've got a couple demos here, and we're gonna demo. So this is my FreeBSD VM locally here. So you can see we have a pool, a ZFS pool named Tank, and we have already a data set for our jails that holds all our jails. So I'm gonna actually just do a full SU. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna create our template data set. and then we're going to cd to the source tree. Jails template. So this is going to install world. So that's going to install all of our shared libraries, all of our binaries that we run. It'll take a couple minutes, and it's pretty fun. I run actually Open Solaris. I run Open Indiana at home, and I run basically the same type of infrastructure. I run zones and that kind of stuff at home. I want to switch to FreeBSD, but I actually kind of killed one of my SATA ports on my motherboard, yanked a cord too hard, and I think I killed one of the soldering connections. And Open Indiana runs fine on it, but FreeBSD complains about the chipset, and it says it can't find the hard drives. So I gotta I'm gonna do a full upgrade to. I run AMD Phenom 2 right now on that server. I'm gonna upgrade to Intel based. So just got to get the funding for that in order. But I actually run basically, I don't run a Drupal module, so I do all it by hand in the terminal. But I run basically the same infrastructure as you would run for FreeBSD, what I'm about to show you with FreeBSD. So as you can tell, instantiating a new jail can take, or creating a new jail from scratch can take a little bit of time. And so right now it takes Wayfair, even though we use template VMs, like I said, it takes us a few hours to go from template VM to fully set up web environment for our developers. And this, it'll take about a quarter of a second. You do the initial setup, which is what we're doing here, and then you create the template, you snapshot the template, and then you can clone the template like none other. And it's very, very quick. I say clone the template. Right now my Drupal module it clones the template from a ZFS standpoint, but it doesn't clone the settings of that template, so the network configuration. And so it still takes, instead of, I'm kind of fibbing when I say it'll take just a quarter of a second to fully clone a jail, but you'll see how quick it is and how easy it is to do. So
for some of us somewhat new to FreeBSD, is this like a depackaging step?
No, this right here is installing your base operating system. You can think of this as kind of like Gen 2 type of thing, where you have to compile the kernel and the base operating system, your basic user land, the ls, here we go, the ls command and su and that kind of stuff. So now we're going to make distribution. Inside the template, and that just installs the etc files. So like your mail aliases and ppp.conf and all your template etc files. It's etc files, however you want to say that. So now what we're going to do, because now the base operating system is installed inside of the jail. So what we're going to do is we're going to create the network. So if I just run ifconfig, you can see that I just have two physical NICs connected to this. This is just the NAT to get out onto the public network, and this is a host network in VirtualBox, so I can SSH directly into it, because VirtualBox won't let me SSH into that 10 dot address, but I can SSH into the 192 address. So we'll create the bridge. Oops. And then what we're going to do is we're going to assign the bridge an IP. Again, you don't have to do this unless you are doing NAT. If you're doing NAT, you do have to do this. And then we'll create the E-pair devices. So, if I can type. So if I just run ifconfig, you see that we have the bridge. This is our layer 3 switch. It has an IP address. And you can see that we now have 2 E-pair devices. Even though we just created, we just did one ifconfig command for one device, it actually gave us 2. An A device and a B device. So what we're going to do is we're going to now plug the A device into the switch. Whoops. And we're going to bring the A device up. You don't give the A device an IP. It's just a pipe. It's just an end of an Ethernet cable. And so now we're going to boot up our jail. So now we can see our template jail is running, and since we're using VNet, the JLS command does not report an IP address because the jail is responsible for managing that E-pair device. Well, not yet because we haven't plugged the E-pair device into the jail. Now the E-pair device is plugged into the jail. So now we're going to execute a shell inside of the jail. So if I run ifconfig inside of the jail, it tells us we have our own LO, our own loopback device, and which is not shared between jails. It's assigned to this jail, and we have our own the E-pair 0B device. And even though I say that the E-pair devices can be thought of just as an Ethernet cable, you do give the E-pair 0, the B device, an IP. So ifconfig E-pair 0B, inet 192.168.2.2. So now we're going to add the route. And we'll set our name server, set our name DNS server to Google's. And with any luck, we can ping Google. So we're fully online. The jail is fully online. So what we're going to do, okay, so Vim is not installed by default. VI is installed, but not Vim. I'm a Vim user. So what I'm going to do is, because I'm a Vim user, I want every jail to have Vim installed. So we're going to install Vim. So if I start up Vim now, it's installed. So now we're gonna call that template jail fully set up because of time constraints. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a snapshot of that jail. Okay, so you can see that we did the snapshot, and we gave it and we named the snapshot after the current date and time. So what we're going to do now is we're going to create a new jail. And so now in our file system we have 2 jails now. We have our I love FBSD jail, and we have a template jail. It's pretty freaking simple. So now we can just actually let's if config epair1 create config bridge 0 add m epair1a config epair1a up jail dash. And the name of the jail and the host name doesn't have to match, but that's how I do it because that's just what makes sense to me. So now, we can ping the gateway, we can ping our template jail, and we can ping Google. And of course, you can set up firewall rules so that if you have different virtual networks, that they can't crosstalk to each other. So if you want, if you're doing this for different clients, you of course don't want client A to talk to client B since they're completely unrelated. So you can set some firewall rules there with IPFW and do some security work there. So now, because we cloned from the template jail, Vim is already installed. It's basically, it is a full-on clone file system-wise of the template jail. So that's that. So that's how we create our template jails. I need to set up port forwarding. So that's how you do that by hand. And now I'm going to show you the Drupal module.
We actually have to close it up.
Oh, do we?
Yeah.
Oh, shoot. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Okay. Well, the Drupal module is pretty freaking sweet. It does all this, and it administers all of your jails. It administers all the networking and all that kind of stuff in a very easy and intuitive way. So that is my presentation. Thank you very much for coming.